We had some slick talk coming out our mouth.
Right.
Hammer thought we were talking about us, his mom. Somebody say, is Third Base on their way to LA? And she goes, yeah. Voice says, good, they're dead. This is Louis Burrell.
We will fight for Hammer!
Hyenas.
Hyenas! We will fight! This is the Game of Thrones!
Eagles. Fish.
King Hammer, yes! Thou must fight for thy honor!
It's one dude right in front of me who's got his hand on his ratchet, pulls down his mask and he goes, yo, man, I love that record, but I was finna smoke you right now, homie.
In the late 1980s and early 90s, MC Hammer didn't just make pop rap history. He nearly made rap beef deadly by putting a $50,000 hit on each member of Third Base.
Hammer used to, people used to like test them a little bit and just to see if he was, dancing Hammer. And a few times in life, I've heard people tell stories like they caught the wrath of MC Hammer ain't no punk.
Yo, his entourage was something like I never seen in my life. Like it was literally
100 people.
More than 100 people.
While known for his You Can't Touch This fame, flashy pants and dance moves, Hammer had deep street ties in Oakland, California. When New York rap group Third Base dissed him in a track, it wasn't just lyrical warfare, it got real. What followed was a chilling story of threats, fear, and a man willing to defend his name at all costs. Chapter 1. The Controversial Lyric. The conflict between MC Hammer and Third Base didn't start with violence, it started with a lyric. But in hip-hop, where reputation is everything, words can be just as dangerous as bullets. In 1989, that danger came in the form of one line that changed everything.
So we were saying our album was doper, but we were saying it New York slick. Like we had some slick talk coming out our mouth.
Right.
Hammer thought we were talking about us his mom.
On their debut album, The Cactus Album, Pete Nice of Third Base rapped a line that many consider the spark of the entire beef. He said, the cactus turned Hammer's mother out. To some, it was a clever play on words, combining their album title, The Cactus, with Hammer's popular 1989 single, Turn This Mother Out. It might have sounded like a harmless jab or a typical diss in a competitive genre known for verbal sparring, but to Hammer, it was something far more serious. Mentioning his mother crossed a line. Intentional or not, the lyric hit a nerve. Hammer didn't hear it as a creative insult or playful banter. He heard it as a direct attack on the woman who raised him, and for someone with deep roots in Oakland's tough streets, disrespecting family was unforgivable. At the time, MC Hammer was already a rising crossover star. He was dominating radio and television with his flashy dance moves, hit songs, and clean image. But beneath the glitz, Hammer was still very much connected to the streets. His inner circle included real figures from Oakland who had nothing to do with music and everything to do with respect and retaliation.
MC Hammer was there. That approached me. He was like, Red, I'm gonna tell you something, you young, but I don't allow nobody talking about my mama. You understand me? I said, yes, sir.
Those close to Hammer say he was furious when he heard the lyric. He didn't see it as just another diss. He saw it as a threat to his name and his family. And when you threatened Hammer's family, you weren't just challenging a rapper. You were challenging a man who could call on people who didn't play industry games. The situation began to escalate quickly. What should have remained a lyrical feud was now being whispered about in back rooms and phone calls. The media didn't catch it at the time, but behind the scenes, Hammer allegedly started moving pieces into place. The talk wasn't about records anymore, it was about retaliation.
And Eric B basically puts a feeler out and finds out it's true. That there's a hit out on Third Base with the Crips.
According to multiple sources, that single lyric led Hammer to put a $50,000 hit on each member of Third Base. He wasn't bluffing, he wasn't performing, he was dead serious. And what had started as one punchline became the beginning of a real-life nightmare for the group that thought they were just playing the game. This wasn't just about hip-hop anymore. It was about respect, territory, and the kind of street justice that doesn't make the headlines. The fear this caused would soon follow Third Base across the country and right into LA, where things almost went terribly wrong. Chapter 2. Hammer's Silence and SERCH'S Fear. By the early 1990s, the tension between MC Hammer and Third Base had already escalated beyond music. What began as a lyrical jab had snowballed into something far more dangerous. The rumor in industry circles was clear. Hammer had allegedly placed a $50,000 hit on each member of Third Base. This was not just rap beef, this was something that could get people hurt. The whispers weren't confined to Oakland. Word quickly spread across the country, and it wasn't long before the threat followed third base from the East Coast to the West. That's when things became terrifyingly real. At the time, third base was still promoting the Cactus album and had a scheduled appearance in Los Angeles. It was supposed to be just another trip on the promo trail, but before they boarded their flight, staff at Def Jam Records stepped in. The warning they received was blunt and alarming. If they landed in LA, there would be people waiting for them, and those people were not fans. According to several sources, Hammer had allegedly tapped members of the Los Angeles Crips. These were not dancers or studio guys. These were street figures with reputations for handling serious business. The reported $50,000 bounty per head was not just industry gossip. It was being taken seriously by everyone who heard about it. The moment third base got the warning, their entire perspective shifted. This wasn't about rhymes anymore. It was about survival.
I never said that lyric. Pete said the lyric, right? So I look over to Pete. Your rhyme, dude. Say something. Nothing.
For MC Serch, the threat became deeply personal. Years later, in multiple interviews, he would recall the emotional and psychological toll of that moment. He admitted the trauma left him in therapy for over 25 years, not because he imagined the danger, but because he believed without a doubt that his life had been in danger. That kind of fear doesn't just fade, it lingers.
And Carmen Ashurst Watson, who was the president of Def Jam at the time, picks up the phone and hears somebody say, is third base on their way to LA? And she goes, yeah. And the voice says, good, they're dead. This is Louis Burrell, and hangs up.
He never forgot the feeling of boarding that flight with a pit in his stomach. He remembered the silence, the tension, and the looming sense that anything could happen once they landed. And for a long time, he kept that fear buried under confidence and bravado. But eventually, it came out in therapy, where he processed just how close they might have come to death.
I'm good. I'm not good. I've gone through 25 years of therapy 3 days a week. I am not good. I wish I could be good. But when somebody tries to kill you over a rap lyric...
The media never reported on the incident when it happened. Fans had no idea what was going on behind the scenes. To the public, MC Hammer was still the upbeat hitmaker in flashy clothes with a big smile. But in the industry, people had started whispering the truth. Hammer was connected. He had money, respect, and people who would carry out orders if needed. Although Hammer never confirmed the hit order, people around him have supported the story for decades. Former insiders, security staff, and even rival rappers have all pointed to this moment as evidence of how seriously Hammer protected his name and his pride. He was not just a performer, he was a man who took disrespect as a reason to act. The flight to LA changed everything for third base. From that day forward, they were no longer just rappers making noise. They were marked men in an industry where ego, money, and street loyalty could collide without warning, and it served as a wake-up call. Hip-hop was evolving. It was no longer just about skills on the mic. Real consequences were now in play.
You know, two of our biggest MCs out the 90s got murdered. You know, R.I.P. Tupac, Shakur, and Biggie Smalls. And that show you enough that, you know, our era was very serious about what we did.
This chapter in their journey would forever be remembered as the moment when words almost turned into bullets. And for MC Serch, that memory would never leave.
So I say, you know what? I said, man, if you feel like we dissed your matriarchal, that's okay, but you know what you did. You know what's going on in these streets. Why don't you man up and see me face to face so we can figure this out? Stop being a...
Chapter 3, Redman's Run-In with Hammer. By the early 1990s, MC Hammer's image was firmly cemented in the minds of the public. He was the energetic, flashy dancer with parachute pants, famous for hits like You Can't Touch This and Turn This Mother Out. Families played his music in living rooms, award shows welcomed him with open arms, but within the industry, a very different story was being told. Behind the scenes, Hammer was building a reputation as one of the most feared and respected men in hip-hop. That reputation was not based on album sales or billboard placements, it was earned in the streets, and Redman was about to experience that side of Hammer firsthand. Redman at the time was a hungry lyricist from Newark, New Jersey. He had just started making serious waves as a solo artist under the mentorship of EPMD. His debut album, What the Album, was gritty, unapologetic, and dripping with East Coast confidence. Redman was everything fans of underground hip-hop craved. He was raw, he was wild, and he didn't care who he offended.
Y'all joke about Hammer? No. That was deep with And he used to, anybody who talked come to the Bay Area, they was in for it, because we seen it.
During one of his early radio freestyles and stage performances, Redman reportedly made a slick remark that took aim at Hammer. It was not a full verse, it was not a diss record, but it was enough. The comment was made with a certain edge, and it didn't go unnoticed. To Redman, it may have been a spontaneous joke or another lyrical flex, but to Hammer, it crossed the line. Hammer had long been sensitive to perceived disrespect. He knew that some in the hip-hop community saw him as a commercial act. He was often accused of selling out or being too flashy. But what many failed to understand was that Hammer took every word personally, and he had both the money and the manpower to respond to those words in ways that few artists could. Redman had no idea that he had stepped into dangerous territory. Soon after the remark, Redman flew to California to promote his rising career. It was a routine trip for most artists: appear on a few radio shows, connect with DJs, meet with promoters, and expand the fan base. But the moment Redman touched down, he sensed something was wrong. According to his later account, he could feel the tension in the air. There were unfamiliar faces watching his movements. There were whispers. There were warnings. Then the confrontation happened. Members of Hammer's inner circle approached him. These were not record label suits or marketing interns. These were street-connected individuals who were part of Hammer's real-life network. Their message to Redman was clear and unmistakable. He had disrespected the wrong person, and his presence in California was no longer welcome. The confrontation was not theatrical. It was not a music video. It was real, and it was serious.
When I did the skit, and I was like, you know what? That goddamn MC Hammer, him, mama, and the whole nine. That came up to me on MTV Cribs on the last episode they had.
Redman realized at that moment that his safety was at risk. He was not dealing with rap feud. He was standing in the middle of a power structure that Hammer had built to protect his image and enforce loyalty.
And we damn near had to bounce up out of there for that, because they had back here.
Redman left California immediately. Years later, he would speak about the incident during interviews with a mix of humility and astonishment. He admitted that he had completely misjudged Hammer. Like many other East Coast artists at the time, he assumed Hammer's polished public image reflected weakness or softness. What he discovered instead was that Hammer had control, influence, and the will to act on perceived slights. The encounter was a turning point for Redman. He never dissed Hammer again. In fact, he would go on to publicly praise Hammer's toughness. In interviews, he acknowledged that while most people thought of Hammer as just a pop act, he had experienced the other side. He had been warned, confronted, and forced to retreat. That lesson stayed with him. What Redman learned during that trip was the same thing others were learning in whispers across the industry. Hammer was not just a performer, he was a leader with deep street roots and a code of personal respect that he enforced with precision. Once he felt violated, he did not respond with moral lyrics. He responded with presence. He responded with people. This was not a one-time reaction, it was part of a growing pattern. First Third Base, now Redman. The message was being sent and reinforced across hip-hop. Artists could laugh, mock, or poke fun, but there would be consequences. Hammer did not let anything slide. And the irony is sharp. The man who the public embraced for his family-friendly music and clean-cut image was behind the scenes, orchestrating some of the most serious retaliations in rap history. His ability to move between both worlds, one of mainstream acceptance and one of street credibility, made him unpredictable and dangerous. Redman's run-in with Hammer was brief but unforgettable. It was a cautionary tale for others in the game. Disrespect, no matter how small or playful, could lead to real-world problems. Hammer did not play industry games. He moved with the weight of someone who had nothing to prove, but everything to protect. For Redman, the cost of a few words was a trip cut short and a life lesson delivered hard and fast. And for the rest of hip-hop, it became another chapter in the growing legend of MC Hammer's unshakable code. Chapter 4: Hammer's Oakland Roots and His Inner Circle of Enforcers. To understand why dissing MC Hammer was never just a lyrical affair, you have to go back to where it all began. Long before the world saw the flashy pants, the Pepsi commercials, or the too legit to quit chants, Stanley Kirk Burrell was a product of the streets of Oakland, California. And Oakland wasn't just any city. It was a place carved by struggle, political fire, and violent undercurrents that shaped every young man trying to make a name for himself.
Nah, he's far from a sucker.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
And Hammer physically fit. I think Hammer put hands on for him. He about 4 or 5 years older than me, probably more. You know, Hammer physically fit.
Hammer grew up in East Oakland, an area that was tough by every measure. He lived in a small home with a big family, often surrounded by poverty, drugs, and gang activity. While the media eventually portrayed him as a mainstream rap icon, those close to Hammer knew that his story started in the trenches. He wasn't born into fame or handed an easy deal. Every inch of his success had been fought for with grit, pain, and a code of respect that was deeply rooted in the streets. As a teenager, Hammer hustled at the Oakland Coliseum, selling baseballs and dancing for fans. He later worked as a bat boy for the Oakland A's, earning the nickname Hammer because of his resemblance to home run legend Hank Aaron. But even then, Hammer had his eyes set on something bigger. He was already building relationships, watching how power moved, and learning how to carry himself like someone who demanded respect. By the time he blew up in the late 1980s with hits like Let's Get It Started and Turn This Mother Out, Hammer was no longer just a local dancer or street kid. He had become a multi-million-dollar brand. But unlike many other pop rap stars, he never turned his back on his old environment. He didn't try to pretend it didn't exist. In fact, Hammer brought that world with him. What most people didn't realize was that Hammer's crew wasn't made up of publicists and stylists. It wasn't a team of handlers trying to polish his image. It was a circle of enforcers, street-connected men from his Oakland neighborhood who traveled with him, lived with him, and protected his legacy at a quiet and terrifying efficiency.
Yo, his entourage
really
was something like I never seen in my life. Like it was literally
100 people.
more than 100 people.
We will fight for Hammer.
Hyenas.
Hyenas. We will fight. This is the Game of Thrones.
Eagles. Fish.
King Hammer. Yes. Thou must fight for thy honor.
These weren't just hype men for the stage. These were men with reputations of their own, some of whom had real criminal pasts, affiliations with gangs, and serious ties to Oakland's underground world. They saw Hammer as more than just their boss. He was family, and when someone threatened that family, they acted. Sources later reported that Hammer employed anywhere between 30 and 50 people directly from his hometown. Most of them were childhood friends or respected figures from the blocks he grew up on. Whether it was security, stage work, or just being on the road, these men stood behind Hammer at all times. They didn't wear suits or sit in boardrooms. They stood on the stage wings, watched the hotel lobbies, and rode in SUVs with the windows slightly cracked just enough to see who was watching. Their presence sent a silent message. Hammer might dance, he might wear glitter, he might smile on television, but disrespect him, and you'd have to answer to Oakland. That meant real people, real consequences, and no need for press conferences to explain what happened next. This loyalty went beyond music. Hammer was known to give money to people in his circle even when they weren't on payroll. He bought houses for his crew, paid hospital bills, funded small businesses. In return, they protected him with a loyalty that could not be negotiated. There's an old saying in hip-hop that image is everything, but with Hammer, the image and the reality were two different beasts. The mainstream audience saw the performer. The industry insiders, especially those who crossed him, encountered something else entirely. When Third Base dropped their diss, Hammer didn't just respond with words. According to multiple reports, he instructed some of his people to make calls, to move, to issue warnings. One story even claims he involved Crips from Los Angeles to make sure the message would spread beyond New York and Oakland. Whether that part is fully accurate or not, the fear it generated was very real. People believed it, and in this industry, perception often hits harder than reality. The confrontation with Redman also followed this exact pattern. No public statements, no interviews, just a quiet move made behind the scenes that shifted the entire situation in Hammer's favor. And it all traced back to this core network of loyal, battle-tested enforcers. For years, artists whispered about Hammer's crew but rarely spoke their names. Not out of secrecy, but out of survival. People knew that if you got too close to mentioning Hammer's real people, it could turn a war of words into something else. Entire tours were adjusted, flights changed, cities skipped. No one wanted to be caught slipping around Hammer's territory. And Oakland wasn't just a place, it was a symbol. A city that produced revolutionaries like the Black Panthers and some of California's most hearted street legends. Hammer grew up in that tradition. He learned how power worked in the neighborhoods, and unlike many other artists who shed their old lives for fame, Hammer blended both. He was both a corporation and the corner. He was the polished product and the enforcer's phone call. This duality is what made him unpredictable. When industry suits tried to dismiss him, his crew made sure those dismissals didn't go far. When artists poked fun in interviews or bars, they were reminded that this man still moved like a street general. He had money, reach, and people who would step in without hesitation. And while his finances would later suffer due to his generosity and entourage spending, in the prime of his career, Hammer moved like a king. Not just a king of music, but a king of muscle. The kind who could shut down entire venues if he felt disrespected, the kind who had a list of people he had helped feed. And when a man feeds that many mouths, the loyalty he commands doesn't come from contracts, it comes from survival. By the mid-1990s, that loyalty had been tested several times. From the third base situation to REDMAN'S warning, Hammer had proved again and again that his words were not just for entertainment, they carried the weight of men who were willing to back them up with action. And the industry took note. What appeared to be just another pop rapper was in fact a man with one foot in the boardroom and the other still planted in the concrete of East Oakland. That truth shaped every feud, every rumor, every moment of hesitation when someone thought about calling Hammer out again. Because behind every platinum plaque there was always a crew watching, and that crew was not made for show. They were made for consequences. Chapter 5. The Def Jam flight warning that changed everything.
So I say, you know what? I said, man, if you feel like we dissed your matriarchal, that's okay, but you know what you did. You know what's going on in these streets. Why don't you man up and see me face to face so we can figure this out? Stop being a
Every rap feud has a moment when the energy changes. For third base, that moment came before their flight even landed in Los Angeles. What started as clever disses suddenly became something far more dangerous. The warning they received was not a rumor, it was a real threat. Third Base had earned a name for their bold lyrics and sharp critiques. Their debut Cactus album poked fun at industry heavyweights, and MC Hammer was a primary target. They twisted his lyrics into jabs, making fun of his mainstream appeal and personal life. They thought it was all part of the game, but MC Hammer was not laughing. Behind the scenes, Hammer was furious, not the kind of anger that leads to a diss track, but the kind that moves people in silence. Word spread that he had called on serious individuals, people with power in the streets, to handle what he saw as disrespect, and that is when someone from inside Def Jam stepped in. As Serch and Pete Nice prepared to fly into LA, a quiet message came through. Someone from Def Jam's circle pulled them aside. The message was brief but chilling. Hammer's people would be waiting, not fans, not critics, people ready for violence. The advice was simple: stay on the plane or change your plans. What they were walking into had shifted from hip-hop to survival. This was no idle threat. According to several insiders, there was talk of a bounty, $50,000 for each head. The rumor was that it came directly from Hammer's circle and involved known gangs in Los Angeles. Whether every detail was accurate didn't matter. The fear it sparked was real. That single flight changed the way Serch and Pete Nice viewed the world around them. The usual excitement of industry trips turned into paranoia. Their appearance schedule was rearranged. No press, no interviews, no risks. They stayed out of sight, listening to whispers of what could have happened if they had stepped off that plane. MC Hammer never responded with words. He didn't go to the press. He didn't release a diss track. Instead, he let fear do the talking. That silence became his weapon, and it spoke volumes. From that moment, Hammer's public image began to shift. He was no longer just a hitmaker in shiny pants. People in the music world started to talk about him differently, not because of what he said, but because of what he didn't have to say. The message was clear: disrespect him, and there would be consequences. Serch later admitted that the moment haunted him for years. He went through decades of therapy trying to process the fear and anxiety that came from being hunted, even if nothing physical happened. He remembered what it felt like to look over a shoulder in every city, to move quietly, to wonder what could happen next.
Ed says to me, he's like, yo, you know, Hammer's here. And I just went, ooh, ooh. And all my boys pulled their ratchets. I just wanted to find them. And we couldn't find them. Feel it a little bit, what you put me and my wife through. Just feel it for 15 seconds. I have to make peace with it. I'm sure he's made peace with it 1,000,000 times over. I'm sure he doesn't even think about it.
And Hammer? He never needed to explain. He never needed to lift a finger in public. The stories did all the work. The fear traveled with its own momentum. This incident exposed how fragile the line between competition and danger really was. For Third Base, it marked a turning point. The playful disses were over. The reality of what they had stirred up was bigger than music. In the end, the message from that flight stayed with them for life. Because they hadn't just mocked a pop rapper, they had provoked someone whose reach went far beyond the stage. And in doing so, they found out when the beat stops, but the consequences don't.